Good evening. This is the regular meeting of the Select Board for Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. Let's go right into announcements and updates. I only have one, which is that unfortunately, due to the weather last week, the Rotary's Dog Day had to be postponed until this coming Sunday. So if you want to join us, costumes are still optional. Take place at Brookline Avenue Playground and Park from 11 to 4 p.m. Anyone else? John?
Just a quick shout out, if that's the appropriate word, to Doug Yu, a police officer who unfortunately was in a police car that was parked at a red light today, according to the accounts we've received. There was a accident caused by car that seemed, I'm giving you the details that have been reported to us so far. So I assume that these will turn out to be quite correct. Car that rear-ended the police cruiser while it was stopped. I also want to just say that the person who was the driver of the car was taken to the hospital, but apparently is going to be okay. Doug Yu apparently is going to be okay. And so that's good news for all of us. Unfortunate accident, but good to know that both our police officer and the other driver involved are going to be okay.
Any other announcements? Okay, let's move into public comment. Raul?
That's good. All right, folks. Well, thank you and welcome to public comment here. This is an opportunity for us to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. We do have a few rules I'd like to share. Each person speaking tonight is limited to 3 minutes. You don't need to use the entire time, but you may if you like. Please refrain from personal attacks and from addressing personnel issues during your comments. Also, members of the public sometimes raise questions during public comment. We may be able to provide a quick answer to a question, but are more likely to work with staff to get a more thorough answer and respond over email. We'll let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining, and when your time is up, please conclude your remarks at that time. If you have more to say, you're welcome to send an email to board members expressing your thoughts in greater detail. Devin, who's first up?
The first person signed up for public comment is Rachel Goodman. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you very much. My name is Rachel Goodman, and I'm speaking as the chair of the Board for Steps to Success. Low-income youth and families in Brookline have suffered significant impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic, including learning loss, food insecurity, housing instability, social isolation, and a loss of income and jobs. STEPS has been working with the Brookline Housing Authority and the Public Schools of Brookline to support these students and their families for 20 years. However, with the pandemic, that work has become even more urgent. Beginning with 4th grade, STEPS provides academic and enrichment programming after school and out of school to about 300 economically disadvantaged youth each year. Yet these students are already struggling by the time that we begin to work with them, lagging 20 percentage points behind their peers in literacy. Our students struggled this past year, and more than a third recorded either a D or an E in one academic class. Their struggles were not only academic, but also financial and mental health related. We had about 40% of our high school students expressing major concerns with virtual learning and engagement. And their families, again, were impacted terribly by job loss and loss of income. As a result, we've seen a spike in the number of our STEPS high school seniors opting not to apply to college this year. And we know that that will have a terrible impact on their future. We also know that after school and out of school programming is very important for our low-income students in terms of their academic performance, school engagement, and attendance. Our programming needs to go lower to the lower grades to close the gap in literacy that we know and see there. We also need to ensure that the transition to high school and academic performance is sustained to improve college enrollment rates. So for our STEPS family, in terms of the ARPA funds, this is what we think we need. Allow us to hire additional staff to enroll and work with earlier intervention with students grades K through 3. Provide emergency funds to students and families that have yet to find or regain employment. To hire a social worker with expertise with our population.
You have 30 seconds.
Heightened their needs. Provide educational tools and supplies. Improve the high school programming to ensure that they're on track for college, and expand our College Success Initiative program. Thank you very much for listening.
At this time, there are 8 attendees and no one has used the hand raise or Q&A feature to indicate they'd like to make a comment.
Heather, back to you.
Thank you. I would also encourage Rachel to submit a proposal using the portal that the town has created. Maybe we can send her the hyperlink to that. Excellent. So we'll move into the miscellaneous. The first part of miscellaneous is approval of the minutes from October 26. Any edits or comments? Then I will move approval of those meeting minutes from October 26, 2021. Bernard?
Aye.
Raul?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And then I will quickly run down the rest of the miscellaneous, approving a change order number 6 for the high school expansion project, Tappan Gym, 3rd floor renovation with CTA in the amount of $68,465.50. Approving change order number 7 for the same project in the amount of $86,289.82. Approving amendment number 1 for same project with NV5 for additional commissioning services in the amount of $6,000. Approving contract PW 22-08 agreement for engineering and supplemental services in connection with Brookline Village signal improvements with Environmental Partners Group, LLC, 1900 Crown Colony Drive, Suite 402, Quincy, Massachusetts, in the amount of $140,900. Approving the following alternate managers for NETA, Joseph Chappell and Javier Lira. Approving the authorization to hire request for a senior clerk typist in the Department of the Town Clerk. Approving the authorization to hire request for a B-Pen Administrative Services and Outreach Coordinator in the Substance Abuse and Violence Prevention for Youth Division of the Public Health and Human Services Department. And finally, a temporary all alcohol sales license to Mel Sibolt to be held on Saturday, November 6, 2021 for a 50th class reunion from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the high school. Sounds like a party. All those in favor? Bernard?
Aye.
John? Raul?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So, Select Board Cannabis Equity Policy. You'll see from the packets that there are 2 competing versions for us to consider here tonight. I know that we have been going round and round on this. We made some changes at a previous meeting, and I've gotten some feedback and wanted to give the board an opportunity to contemplate additional changes or to hold our position. So Melissa, do you want to just kind of talk about maybe the differences in philosophy between the 2 positions, and then I'll open it up to select board members to say how they're feeling.
Sure. So the first version is what we talked about last night, and is also not last night, last week, and is also included in my memo where we talked about just simply striking the language with the priority processing for residents. And then also you had a note from me asking for a review of the exit language in the policy. Wanted to know if there would be additional discussion on potentially revising that, given what Cambridge has faced and some of the feedback that they've received from some of their equity applicants. So that's one version of the policy. And then we had some additional edits proposed. I think they were discussed at advisory committee, looking to kind of embed some of the criteria that the CCC has established into the policy. I had conversations earlier today with town council. They are not recommending that approach because essentially we should be relying on the work of the CCC. Adding that language to the policy, has some legal issues, and then administratively it would be a burden as well. So at this point, staff's recommendation is to stay with the revisions as proposed and discussed last week.
I know one of those sticking points was our ability to do Corey backgrounds. And I mean, administratively burdensome aside, town council has said that we don't even really have the authority to do that because we did not change our bylaw. So I'll open it up to other select board members to talk about whether they want to see some of these changes adopted or if they want to stay with the current policy. I'll recognize Miriam and just say that I think the two philosophies is basically whether or not we need to indoctrinate a very prescribed policy or if we should leave it open. Those are the two philosophies. Miriam and then Bernard.
Thank you. I actually just have a question on some wording that is not clear to me. So on page, so it's on my packet, it's page 135, but actually it looks like on the PDF, it's page 132. Subheading definitions under equity applicant, number 2, B. At least 51% of employees or subcontractors have drug-related CORI and are otherwise legally employable in cannabis enterprises. Should it say drug-related negative CORI, clean CORI? Like, I feel like, does it just means they have a CORI? I mean, a CORI is just a background check. So is it required that their background check be clean? So I guess this sentence just confuses me. So I'm just asking for a little clarification.
I think that's another reason why we probably shouldn't have it in our policy. This is CCC language. And so they are essentially, using the results of the CORI to make their decisions. And, without understanding how that works, I don't think it really makes sense to include it.
Okay. Well, I have lots of other issues related exactly to that. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the kind of the short summary from town council was that, CCC has developed a policy. They have established criteria. They are making the definitions. They are doing the work. We can then use that work to help us with our policy. That's essentially what we're recommending.
Got it. Thank you. And I think that's where I'm falling, but I want to hear what others have to say.
Let's start with Bernard.
Okay, let me try to work through this. So the CORI issue, don't we, I mean, that shouldn't really be in our policy anyway. That's not an equity policy. That's something that should be in all of our terms and conditions for all the retailers. Because one of the purposes of the statute is to mitigate the damage done to certain communities, including jails, being jailed and getting CORIs. So I mean that's something we should want all of our retailers to do. I guess the other thing is, I just got back, so I may not be totally focused here. It's not clear that the way that the policy is written can't be easily gamed. And I'm not sure that we've really addressed that sufficiently. You know, one of the problems you have with any minority contracting program, et cetera, is that, you know, front operations or operations that are based on, or proposals where the corporate structure of a contractor is such that you don't really know who's owning and what ownership means. I don't think we've really addressed that adequately. I don't have any suggestions right now, but I think we need to address that. For example, by making sure that the applicants, you have substantial financial means, because I mean that's a sign that someone's acting as a front, that they don't themselves have substantial financial means to contribute to the capital of a business that requires a huge investment of capital. So I don't have any suggestions right now, but I think we need to address, you know, issues like that so that we don't end up creating a situation that can be easily gamed.
John, then Raul, then Miriam.
Yeah, I want to echo Bernard Green's concerns about that our policy not leave us open to being easily gamed, as he said. But I do want to ask a question as well as to whether Jonathan Simpson or someone else from our legal department. I don't see that person, Jonathan or other, here.
Jonathan's here.
Oh, he is here. Excuse me, Jonathan. I didn't mean to miss you. So I wonder if Jonathan could weigh in on that. What is our protection, you know, in the proposed policy that we not be, as Bernard said, gamed by people who are basically creating a front that appears to qualify them as the kind of applicant we're looking for, but it's just a front. So let's start with that question.
Well, and to be extra clear, assume that we don't change the policy here tonight and we go with the current version.
Certainly. Thank you. Sorry about that, John. I just logged on, so you weren't missing me. I was actually not here until about a minute ago. It's a question that I think is already addressed very well in the current policy, because the current policy, as a threshold requirement to be an equity applicant, you have to have been certified through one of the two state programs run by the Cannabis Control Commission, who are doing this and have been doing this for several years and have much more experience than we would be able to bring to the table in vetting applicants for exactly the kind of criteria that we would want to be referencing. So that's the doorway. That's the thing that they're going to have to walk through before they even get to turn in an application for these licenses under the policy as currently written. And then we will ultimately be able to review all of these license applications. There's no requirement that whoever applies gets a license. There's not even a requirement that whoever applies first is going to get the license. My understanding is the program will receive applications and the board will consider them. And then the board will decide if any of the applicants are suitable for a license. I think are in the best for Brookline, and that those are a situation that I think those two levels of checks should insulate us pretty well against anyone attempting to game the system.
Thank you.
Chair, would it be okay if I ask a follow-up question or two?
Of course.
As a follow-up question, is there any kind of an issue in your mind as to whether we say majority ownership or 51% ownership? I've had that question raised with someone who looked at our policy. Should it be one, not the other?
I don't. This is not really my field, but in my mind, I think majority ownership is the customary term. But I certainly think 51% or more, it sort of has a logical there's a consistency there with majority ownership, but I would stick with majority ownership simply because of it's what I've seen in, again, referring back to the Cannabis Control Commission's documents, that's what's in their criteria. So it's an easy reference point to use their language and their standards. And ultimately, we have a number of contacts there to use their expertise and that just using the same terminology makes it that much easier.
Well, I'm way above my pay grade, but someone who looked at it thought that it would be commonplace in corporate language that it would be 51%, not majority. But yeah, as I say, way above my pay grade. One last question, if I may. Are you satisfied that the language of our policy addresses the issue of whether future owners would have the same rights to pass on their license as all other owners? Is that in our policy, or is that actually contrary to our policy?
In our policy as written, once you have obtained a license, you effectively have it. You have the same rights as anyone. There is no restriction on a license once you have it. The current policy speaks to transfers of applicants, and you would potentially, if you have a transfer during the application process, you would lose your ability to proceed. But in my opinion, it would need to be spelled out a little more clearly if we were going to attempt to put in a 5-year period where there could be no transfers once a license is received, something along those lines. But I believe as written, it mostly speaks to the application process.
So we would not run into the problem Cambridge has run into or ran into of applicants saying that they were being treated differently than prior applicants in terms of their, the potential to realize a gain from passing on the license.
I do not believe so. No, I believe that it is good policy to at least I believe it is good policy to require that an equity applicant refrain from transfers to a non-equity applicant during the process of application, as a logistical matter, if nothing else. But I believe that as currently written, the policy gives them full rights, the same rights a licensed applicant that we've licensed into the standard for retailer licenses.
Thank you.
Would enjoy.
Thank you very much, John.
Raul.
Thank you. And I appreciated that line of questioning and the responses. It makes what I have to say a lot quicker, I think. Let's make one thing clear. There's 2 proposals in the packet there. Only one was drawn up by town staff, and the extensively redlined one was submitted by town meeting member Scott Ananian, who I don't think is here. I checked earlier, he wasn't. I spoke to him earlier, and we talked a little bit about it, and we spoke last week about this too. I'm of the mind that we should stick with the one that we currently have, which is the one that follows Melissa's memo, for a few reasons. One, it does create, as Jonathan said, that doorway, right? And so we have a defined doorway that people need to walk through in order to become eligible for these licenses. And by the way, it's important to note that these licenses are above the statutory sort of minimum number of licenses that we required to give out, which we already have. And so we have a little bit more flexibility with these additional licenses. Now, that doesn't mean we can do whatever we want. We still have to create a process, and then we need to follow that process. And so we're talking about, what that process might look like. What we've defined in the policy is the doorway through which applicants need to go through, right? And so you've either got to get, the economic empowerment doorway is now closed, but there's still applicants that achieve that status that have yet to open businesses in Massachusetts. And according to the most recent Cannabis Control Commission meeting that I saw, none of them are still moving forward in the application process. So there's still live possibilities. And then there's the social equity program, and those applicants are also eligible here. The thing where I think the sort of extensively redlined version, the problem there is twofold, really. One, it puts the administrative burden on the town to figure out whether or not those applicants meet those criteria, as opposed to saying, well, the Cannabis Control Commission will determine whether or not you've met those criteria because you've either become an economic empowerment applicant or a social equity applicant. So we know that you've met those criteria. We don't want that administrative burden on our side. Second, if we start tinkering a little bit too much with the criteria, then we also put ourselves in legal jeopardy. And I think that's a reasonable concern that, I know that it's important to many board members, to probably all board members, but that these licenses have the best possible chance or provide the best possible chance for businesses with a majority ownership by people of color to open operation in Brookline. But if we cannot legally set that as a standard, and I know there are probably folks that want us to, heck, I want us to, but I want us to create a legally defensible process as well. What we have here creates that doorway and then allows us, by looking at the wide variety of applicants that come in, to then think about what it is that we want to prioritize within that. And we have administratively the opportunity to as Jonathan said, open up the process and to keep it open until we feel like we've got sufficient applications. So we feel like we've got a diverse enough pool to make a decision. We don't have to open up a process and then a month later or 2 months later or whatever it is, make a decision and give out those licenses. We don't have to do that. In fact, we could say, you know what, we don't feel like we've gotten enough applicants, or we don't feel like the pool has the kind of depth that we're looking for, and we want to keep this process going until we find those right applicants. And so for all those reasons, I think that's why I think we should stick with the policy we have with the minor changes that that Melissa outlined in the document. And that's it.
Miriam.
Thank you. So I want to say that, yes, I agree with Raul as well. And that would be those would be the changes I would support. And then I would also just want to clarify my stance on Corey, just to make clear. I actually am not a big fan of Corey for this purpose, especially since we're actually trying to get people who suffered really unfairly with criminal records. So we want to actually encourage people who've had this experience to be working and to get into industry. So I just want to clarify, I'd wish we didn't do Corey on any of these folks. But that is aside, I just want to make sure that policy, that is clear on my part. On the other part, I agree with Raul and Heather. I would very much support the changes in the staff has suggested in Melissa's memo.
Well, I am detecting a consensus on the board. John, did you want to say something? You're muted.
Thanks, Heather. And forgive me if I was clicking and unclicking my raised hand. Just one quick question, and maybe I just don't have the most up-to-date version of the document. I see language at the very end, number 4, evidence of current Brookline residency, parentheses, to receive priority processing, and then it defines the evidence. But I thought we struck that provision in number 3.
Melissa, do you have the most current version that we have approved?
It's page 135 in your packet. You'll see that edit, John.
That has been edited. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bernard?
Hey, yeah, thank you. I hope that our equity policy doesn't preclude our continuing what we started with the so-called majority-owned firms, requiring that they increase their ownership by people of color. And I think it's pretty much an outrage that we get, and maybe we should have thought about this earlier, but it's an outrage that we get companies coming in the cannabis industry with ownership by 100% white owners, when clearly if they made an effort, there are plenty of Black and Hispanic owners who could be part of their ownership team and make this and really address the issues that the statute was intended to address. So all I'm saying is that this should not be a substitute for continuing the pressure on the existing firms that we have licenses for.
Yes, and the good part about this being a select board policy is that when we come up with that light bulb solution on how to address that issue, we can take it up again and hopefully incorporate that language. Any other comments? So Bernard?
Yeah, by the way, someone suggested that this should be a bylaw as opposed to a policy of the board that would be more, would be stronger than just a policy, and that the board draft regulations to implement the bylaw. Any thoughts on that, Jonathan? Or anyone?
Well, I mean, that's essentially the conversation that we're having here tonight, because the Scandinavian version is trying to do exactly what you just described.
I actually, Chairman Hamilton, I think Bernard's question is valid. The Scott's proposal is to amend the policy, but there was an email earlier that would have pushed all of this language into the bylaw, which would only, I believe, magnify the issues that that would arise if we did so. It's just I believe a bylaw is not a great place to put something that we will benefit from flexibility and discretion in the future. I think it's just out of it. A bylaw requires, of course, town meeting to change it, and it would be, I think, it would very likely put us in a much trickier position as we went forward to try to match what we were doing to the bylaw standards, because we didn't have any other choice. To me, it's not a very good match. So I think that it is best suited for a policy, which you guys have already tried to enact.
Thank you. Any other discussion? It sounds like we're content to remain with the policy that we have already discussed and adopted. Do I have any takers for the other document version?
No, I just only that I think what we would need to do is revote this policy with that one change that that John referenced and Melissa referenced earlier.
Great. Okay. What section was that, Melissa?
That was page 135, section 3, I believe.
Section 3. Okay.
Just striking the residency priority processing.
Got it. Okay.
And that's because we're going to be pooling the applications and potentially kind of establishing additional criteria.
Okay. So I will move us to adopt the revised policy that strikes residency requirements as outlined in the previous section 3. All those in favor? Bernard?
I guess not enthusiastically.
Raul?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you very much for continuing to work on this.
Thank you.
So, moving into warrant article positions. Article 14 has been withdrawn by the petitioner. So we move on to warrant article 19, nuisance control. Do people remember what that warrant article was about? Do you need a little refresher? Do you want to talk about it before we vote?
That's fine.
Miriam first, and then John.
Just as I recall, that was the noise nuisance law, but to apply to some more public spaces like restaurants. Is that?
Yes, I remember a deep conversation about chairs.
Yeah. So I mean, it also includes vegetation encroaching upon the sidewalk and preventing free access on sidewalks. So it's more than just that.
But there's another warrant article, actually, warrant article, I think it's 6, that is solely addressing sidewalk obstructions.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's why
think
I asked if people needed a refresher.
Yeah.
John,
That- yeah,
did
I
you
did.
have something to add or ask?
Yes. I just want to say that would have been an interesting hybrid of an article, but no brawling and no overgrown shrubbery. But anyway, I have to confess, I'm mystified by this article. It doesn't seem possible to me that that we lack the latitude in our law enforcement to apply the same law enforcement to people who are dining on the sidewalk that we would apply to people who got involved in some sort of a fracas inside an establishment. I don't think we got a chance to really explore that question when we took this up last week. And I'm just wondering if anybody can give me an opinion as to whether this is even necessary.
I see that Jonathan Simpson is still technically with us. I'm not sure that he has the answer. I will also add that Melissa Goff has informed me that the AC is amending this warrant article language, but she doesn't have that amendment yet. So we could punt. Jonathan, I see you unmuted. Do you need John to rephrase?
I can only relay what I've heard from the petitioner, which is that in his conversations with the police department, they believe their enforcement authority is limited in just this manner that he's trying to address. Now that's secondhand, and now third hand when I bring it to you. So, but that's my understanding of where the issues go with the responsibility in terms of public way versus within the bounds of the actual business.
So I don't recall that we got a chance to hear directly from local police, either from the chief or someone delegated by him, as to whether he agrees that that is the limit on their authority right now.
John, actually, I was misremembering. And when I spoke with the petitioner about it, he said the police actually wanted to address an issue with the article and actually sort of curtail some of what it might extend to, i.e., if you go to someone else's business and cause a ruckus, the police don't believe that business owner whose business is closed for the night should be liable. So actually, I would withdraw what I said previously. I do not know whether the police feel their authority is limited in a manner required by this bylaw. Sorry about that.
No worries. We're putting you on the spot, so you're actually helping us. I do know that the petitioner is here. Maybe we can ask him what the changes are to that the AC is making. I saw some hands up, but maybe we just go to the petitioner. Miriam?
My hand was up, but actually I'd like to hear from the petitioner first, and because that is exact I have the same quandary as John does.
Okay. Mr. Davis, if you could answer John's question and maybe address any of the language that the AC is proposing.
Yes, thank you. Jonathan Davis, petitioner, Article 19. Just to give just a bit of a background, the technical language of the existing nuisance bylaw does not reach or only reaches gatherings that occur on privately owned real property. So for example, a restaurant located inside its bricks and mortars building that is located on renting the real estate from a landlord. Or for example, if a restaurant has a back patio that is located on privately owned real estate, that would be reached by the existing bylaw. The language itself doesn't appear to reach real property that is not owned privately, which is the case of which is the case of a seating area, for example, that is permitted to be used by a restaurant or other commercial establishment, curbside or on the public sidewalk. That's sort of the background here. The Chief Morgan had a concern about a situation where a restaurant, as an example, had closed for the night, and people come along, passersby come along after the restaurant has closed up, and then use the seating and table area unknown by the operator or the owner of the restaurant, and then a public nuisance occurs. And he was concerned, the chief was concerned about that. And one of the changes in the amendment deals with that situation by exempting the restaurant owner or operator from liability in that kind of a situation where again, for example, the restaurant has closed for the night. There's another change that was a structural change asked for by the Public Safety Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee, just to try to make some of the language clearer. So those are the two changes. And again, I would just try to emphasize that this is simply trying to apply and to give the police this kind of tool that they already have as to a restaurant or a bar or any commercial establishment that is located on privately owned real estate, whether indoors or even outdoors. If there's an outdoor seating area or gathering area that is also located on privately owned real estate, this is simply extending what already exists in those circumstances to a new situation. And the new situation is the sublicensing. I believe it's a sublicense that the town gives to commercial establishments or commercial owners or operators to utilize the public way, the town sidewalk or curbside. There's one interesting issue. It's a little factual issue. I understand that there's actually a piece of sidewalk down between, I believe, Carlton Street and St. Mary's, a piece of it that is actually privately owned and has some tables and chairs out there. And that would be reached by the existing bylaw. But if the town were to issue a permit or a sublicense to the same operators of the restaurant to put tables and chairs a few feet over onto the public way, that would not be reached by the existing bylaw.
Thank you. So has the AC actually adopted these, or have they not voted on it yet?
They have adopted it.
They have?
Yes.
Okay. So that, I think, would be the version we would probably be voting on here tonight. Any thoughts on favorable action? Miriam and then John.
Mr. Davis, thank you very much for your explanation. I just still feel like we're solving for a problem that I just can't define that exists. I think the police have this authority. I don't think we need to re-give it to them. So I'm not in favor of this. Thank you, though.
John?
Same concerns as Miriam. And I don't know how else to say it except to say, if the police don't have the authority to intervene when there is some kind of a disturbance on a public sidewalk or on a street or at the curb, that's news to me. And I haven't heard anything said that suggests that the sidewalk is no longer a sidewalk, or the curb is no longer a curb, or the street is no longer a street. So I feel like the origins of this bylaw change are in an assumption about limits on police authority that is just a flat out incorrect assumption. I applaud the petitioner for being concerned that they have the authority to intervene in situations in which a sidewalk restaurant experiences some kind of a disturbance or fracas or causes some kind of a disturbance or fracas. But I just don't see where we need this in order for the police to be able to respond. I'd like to know if the police have actually had occasion to stop short of responding to something because it's actually one of the restaurant seating areas, and they felt they don't have authority over that seating area. I have heard of no such incident occurring in Brookline.
So, Mr. Davis, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, but please be concise.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Concisely, what the police don't have the authority to do in connection with the curbside licensed to a commercial operator is to de-escalate using a system of fines and tickets rather than a criminal process. And that was made clear in 2010 in the explanation of the original bylaw, that this creates a new de-escalatory kind of tool for the police. But unfortunately, it doesn't go to reach the new idea of permitted use of a public way. There was, to my knowledge, one instance back towards the end of May when the Hamilton was operating on a public way venue that went on until 2 o'clock in the morning, and I know from constituents that they found it quite disruptive. And I don't think I don't think the police were able to operate with the de-escalatory process of handing out tickets or handing out a ticket to the owner. And as a result, the police were driving by, but my understanding is that they weren't stopping.
Thank you. So that is the first time that I have heard about the de-escalation or the ticketing. When you present at town meeting, you may want to front load that into your comments, because I think part of the confusion is that the explanation is not really tight about what this warrant article is doing. Any thoughts given that new information? I'm getting the sense on the board that we may not be voting favorable action on this. John, are you moved by that new information?
No.
Okay.
I thank John for the information, but no.
So, I'm kind of torn. I can certainly acknowledge the logic, but one case a year, I'm not sure is the reason for a warrant article. So I guess I will move no action. All those in favor, Bernard. You're muted, Bernard.
Kevin muted me. Aye, on no action.
Okay. Raul.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Miriam.
Aye.
You know, I'm gonna vote no. I can see it, John. I can see why. I just think it needs to be a little tighter next time. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to, I think, some zoning. Yes, off-street parking. Now, there were two competing warrant articles, 23 and 24. Our planning department was sponsoring 24, or I'm sorry, the planning board was sponsoring 24. I think I recall from the conversation that they were trying to get in alignment and that the planning board would not be moving Article 24. Melissa, do you have any update regarding that? If we should just vote
Yes.
on warrant Article 23 and take no action on 24?
I'm just going to read to you. Michael Zurab sent an email with his motion. So the motion of Article 23 includes warrant Article 24 in its entirety as amended by its petitioners, the planning board. If the petitioner's version of 23 passes, then Article 24 is moot because all of the language has been adopted. If 23 fails, whether amended or unamended, then the planning board's motion under 24 is live. If the AC amendment to 23, which is different from what the petitioner is proposing, passes, then the AC motion under warrant Article 23 means that the warrant Article 24 is live because the AC amendment to the language of Article 24 is that they rolled into 23 is more restrictive than the planning board's motion under warrant Article 24. I think we were looking for Steve Hyken to confirm that last sentence, but I have not heard that. I do have the petitioner's amended motion that I can call up for the board. I don't recall if it's in your packet, but I can call that up if you'd like to see the changes that have been made.
Please, and I'll just acknowledge Jonathan Klein, I believe, is a co-petitioner on this and may want to weigh in. I assume that the petitioners are not in favor of the AC's competing motion. So we will have to have a conversation about which version we will be voting favorable action on.
Page 151 in your packet.
Thank you.
Page 151 in your packet.
It's a team effort during town meeting season.
Do you want me to call it up or are you okay referencing your packet?
Bring it up if you can.
Okay.
I'll do my best to try to make sure I see anyone who's raising their hand to speak.
Sure.
John?
Are you taking requests for questions from the board at this point or not?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
And is the petitioner behind 23 here?
I believe Jonathan Klein is one of the co-petitioners and he is here.
Jonathan Klein, great. I'm in this situation that I often find myself in, which is that a warrant article or articles in this case have gone through so many different, suggested versions and amendments that then capture what the person who's suggesting a change, wants to capture, that I just can't get my head around, what are these different versions actually saying in simple, plain English, one paragraph. So John, if you don't mind my asking, is there any version at this point that captures what I would hope will be captured? And that is new construction, gotta have, electric, whatever you want to call it, resources for parking spaces. 50% plus renovations, gotta have electric resources for parking spaces. But
Can I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
I think you're talking about warrant article 25, which is going to come later. And right now we're talking about 23 and 24.
No, that just shows how confused I am, Jeff.
So this is off-street parking requirements.
I prove it at virtually every meeting. So I'll save my questions for when we get to 25 and I'll retreat at this point.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Miriam?
So actually, what I would love is for Jonathan to do still what John was asking, which is, can you highlight the top line changes and tell us where you as the petitioners and where the planning board land on this in terms of the AC recommendations?
Sure. let me do my best to make that as succinct as I can. So warrant article 23 originally required the elimination of all parking minimums in the T-pod and had some other changes. Warrant article 24, supported by the planning board, had a special permit procedure to allow the reduction of parking minimums down to 0. All of this relating to new construction or substantial renovation. After a lot of work, there was a compromise between the planning board and the petitioners, which is now incorporated in warrant article 23. And that reduces parking minimums in the T-pod down to 0.5 for micro units and 1 for all other units, about a cut in half approximately. And in addition, throughout town, not just in the T-pod, gives the Board of Appeals the right to further reduce parking down to 0 if a number of special factors are met of compensating amenities. So it's a combination of 23 and 24, some automatic reductions in the T-pod, plus further reductions by special permit with compensating amenities. And that is supported by the petitioners, by the planning board. It was also supported by the ZBLC and by HAB and by EDAB. So that's the version that is being supported by the petitioners. The AC version was a version that eliminated the automatic reductions, number 1, and number 2 made the reductions by special permit be limited to only half of the prior parking requirement, I believe, as opposed to allowing it to go down to 0. So that was the alternate version that was approved by the advisory committee. They are, I call them the outlier here, because all the other boards supported the petitioner planning board compromise. Is that clear?
Yes, that was very clear. Thank you very much. Miriam has a follow-up, and then I will acknowledge Raul.
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent. And I just want to double check, one of the discussions that was about a handicapped accessible parking or disability accessible parking. So how is that handled in the compromise? And then just to say to the rest of the select board, I support the petitioner and planning board version of this warrant article.
Thank you for making your position clear.
So there's no change in the requirement that handicapped accessible parking meet all state minimum requirements. If the parking minimum is lower, then the handicap number will also be lower, but it applies to whatever parking is provided. And of course, these are just changes in minimums. They're not changes in the actual parking that could be provided by an owner. So I'll mention, if I could, although this wasn't the question, one more change. There was a change that was made, relatively recently at the request of town council and of the moderator, that was made to make sure that this complied with the housing choice requirement, that it could be passed by a majority vote. And that is a change that says that the as of right reductions only apply where they result in additional housing units. So that was a change that was added relatively recently, perhaps after some of the board hearings that I mentioned. So it may not have been considered by them, but it was what I'll call a savings clause that the moderator and council, Simpson, recommended in order to make sure that they could agree that this was could be considered under housing choice and approved by a majority vote.
Thank you. Very informative. Raul.
Sure, that was all I needed to hear. I think those were the right questions and the right answers, and so I'm also ready to support the petitioner's collaborative version with the planning board and others. So there you go.
Any other discussion before we take a vote on this warrant article? Seeing none, Bernard.
Yeah, I just mentioned that the zoning bylaw committee, we really urged the two sides to try to get together. So the fact that they did is something that I appreciate, and I'll vote for it as a result. The petitioner's revised article.
Yes, I'm quite delighted at the compromise language.
It wasn't easy, but they got to it.
So I will move.
Like 3 hearings, right, to get there, right?
It's a process. I will move favorable action on the amended warrant article 23 language, the petitioner's version, not the AC. All those in favor? Bernard,
Aye.
Raul,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we don't need to take a position on warrant article 24, or should we, if it does end up being a fallback position?
So I think, given that you've moved 23, you should probably have a no action,
No action.
vote on 24.
Okay, so let's do that. No action on warrant article 24. We can always open to reconsider this. Bernard,
Aye.
Raul,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Are we finally to the EVs yet? I think we are. So, John, you had lots of questions. I don't necessarily see.
I see Polly here, so she might be able to help us.
Okay. Devin, if you might promote Polly.
And what choice are we looking at with Article 25? Are we facing more than one version? Only one version at this point?
So the advisory committee tabled 25 until no, I think they might be taking that up tonight, actually, or maybe on Thursday.
I see Jesse Gray has joined us as well. He might be able to say what the current state is of the petitioner's version versus any AC action. Jesse, do you want to just jump in and say where things stand?
Sure, and I see we have the building commissioner here. So we filed an edited version that incorporated further input less than 24 hours ago. And so we have yet to really hear back on that latest version from staff, but that latest version uses the code definition of EV ready, which we now understand is much more workable than we had realized. And the trigger is now much more significant. It's pretty much along the lines of fossil fuel free. It's new construction or 50% rehabilitation, plus anytime you add new parking. That's the one difference there on the trigger. But we're eager to hear more from staff about the latest version as well.
Well, that's a great segue. Dan, do you want the pleasure? Have you had an opportunity to review it?
I have, yes, thank you. Well, there's been, many meetings between the petitioners and staff, and they've been, very productive and informative. I still have a few concerns with respect to the residential aspect of the EV warrant article, and more so with the 1 and 2 family provisions. There's a lot of things in here that I agree with, and I do want to just say that I do not take positions on the articles. I just try to get the best written document, something that we can enforce, something that's understandable, and again, it's been very cooperative between the petitioners and staff. But my biggest concern right now is the 1 and 2 family provision that would require at least one EV ready, station, in a 1 or 2 family dwelling. And what that does is it creates a complication for my wiring inspector and building inspectors, because it kind of merges the 2 different codes. There are 2 codes that we enforce. There's the International Residential Code and the International Building Code. The IRC is the residential, applies to 1 and 2 family. The IBC is commercial and applies to 3 family and up. And when we apply language and systems that are going to go into a 1 and 2 family that aren't covered under 1 and 2 family, we're going to have to bring some of the IBC into that. And, at this point, we're really not sure how we would enforce it. It comes down to mostly venting and, what is required venting for an EV, station. It would be up to the design engineer or the, the applicant engineer or whoever is providing, the information to us for us to be able to make a, any final, determination. And, we have gone back and forth with the petitioners. I have requested and preferred that the 1 and 2 family not be part of this at this point. The electrical code already requires a dedicated 20 amp, service to a garage. It doesn't say that's for charging. It could be used for anything, but it would charge a vehicle. It certainly wouldn't. It would take longer to charge in a 20 amp dedicated circuit than it would on any EV ready 50 amp circuit. And there are a couple of other things. I think the 100% component is a little excessive. That could create issues with respect to a service, the size of a service, and what, again, the design engineer, would have to do load calcs, would have to then back in to find out if the utility would provide, certain services. So that is, in addition to the 1 and 2 family, that's a concern. And then there's a waivers section, which I'm in favor of. But at this point, there's a lot of discretion on my part. It allows me to make, certain, decisions. And most of the time in the zoning bylaw, if you don't want to comply with a certain section, it requires relief from the Zoning Board of Appeals through some sort of special permit process. Again, I just started looking at this today. We got it at 10 o'clock last night. So those are some of my, my initial, review. And I think to Jesse's point, the subcommittee is going to be, I'm not sure, Jesse, is it tomorrow at noon? They're holding a
Thursday at noon.
Thursday at noon subcommittee. I'm trying to rework my schedule to get in there, but I have a number of meetings already. And then Thursday night, I think the full advisory is looking at it, as well as the planning board, Polly, I think. So I think there's still some work to be done, between staff and the petitioners, but hopefully we'll be able to move forward and get something that we could agree with.
So I want to acknowledge Raul's hand is up, and then John.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I'll just say it sounds to me like what's supposed to be happening during this period of time is happening, right? Different versions are coming up. The Dan's weighing in, the AC will weigh in, other folks will weigh in. It just seems, I don't know that we're going to have a lot to contribute tonight based on where this article is right now. And I'm going to recommend we just kind of let some of these conversations, play out and, compromises be made. And then if we need to vote between different versions at a future date, then we should do that.
John?
Yeah, I certainly agree with my colleague that we're not going to be ready to vote this tonight. However, I did want to seek some clarification as long as we have all the parties here. So the concerns expressed by Dan, and Dan, thank you as always for such a thoughtful approach that you take to these issues. It's not clear in my mind, are we referring to, these are concerns that apply to new construction 1 and 2 family, or new construction 1 and 2 family plus any situation in which a 1 and 2 family owner adds a parking space, either one of those or both?
It would be anything to do with 1 and 2 family right now at this point. We did have some early conversations about 1 and 2 family dwellings, what would apply, a parking space. Typically a 1 and 2 family dwelling doesn't really have a parking space. They have a driveway. What is the distinction between a parking area, a driveway? Then we got into the garages and inside a garage or outside. So I think it's still, my staff, my wiring inspector especially is, concerned about the 1 and 2 family end of this. I think we can certainly come to agreement on, 3 family and up. There are ways that we could handle that based on current code, wording in the bylaw. I'm not overly concerned on that side of it, the IBC. It's the IRC where right now it's pretty much exempt under, all these codes for 1 and 2 families. So when it's not in the IRC, it puts us in a predicament where we can't look at that code anymore. We have to go to the IBC, which typically we don't enforce for a 1 and 2 family dwelling. So that's the concern, and that's what internally inspectors and staff are struggling with.
So would this be resolved if there were, a condition attached to 1 and 2 families that it is the, I'm going to sound really out of my element here, but the low voltage or the long charging time version of a charger that, is, already standard for what is in a garage. But you could not have one of the more, fast charging outlets? So
yes, to some degree. I think the concern the wiring inspector has is that currently his code just says you need a 20 amp dedicated service to the garage. And that can be used for whatever the resident, wants it to use it for. Charging could be one of it, but the code doesn't say charging. If you put this 50 amp EV ready charger in the garage, in his view, that creates an issue, because now that obviously is for some sort of car charging device. And what impacts does that have? And what is he going to have to pull out of, different codes? Because at that point, the electric code and the building code kind of overlap. They request certain types of ventilation. And that's where the struggle and, in our view, the complication, rises to the top.
One last question, and then I promise to bow out. Does this mean that under present practice, if a owner of a 1 or 2 family decides that they want to buy a Tesla, they want to have the 50 volt charging, capability, that we tell them you really can't do that under current, Brookline building and electric code standards?
You're getting on some good points here that we've had, many discussions on. The wiring inspector, I did have conversations with him. He has allowed some Tesla models to put their charging devices in the garage because they specifically identify the Tesla vehicle as not requiring ventilation. At this point, that's the only vehicle that he's aware of that has that in his in their owner's manual. And that's what the code, and that's what his code has him, have to verify. It's a very odd provision in a code because, we don't know what cars are driven in and out of a car after a residential building.
Right.
It gets sold and owned and transferred and all sorts of things. But his concern is Teslas right now, they're the ones that are up front. They're the ones that are ahead of the ball game. They're the ones that have these, safety things and provisions in their manuals. But other vehicles do not have that he's aware of, that he could find or can find. And that's where the concern comes in. At that point, if it was not a Tesla or a vehicle that required ventilation, that's where the issue arises.
I get it. Thank you.
So we will probably wait to see what happens at AC on Thursday. But thank you all for attending. And we can't wait to see what the result is.
Thank you.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah. So warrant article 26. Boy, it pays off to wait. I understand that A compromise has been reached. Did we lose Melissa?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe she had to go down to the advisory committee to address, but I don't know if there's anybody else who could speak to that, but that is my understanding as well.
So I don't know if I'm moving the AC version or.
Let me see if I can find out.
Okay. Maybe we can skip ahead to the budget warrant article.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
was pretty straightforward.
No, that one I'm going to be doing, but let me just make a quick note to Melissa that what were the two numbers, 26 and which was the other one? Or there was
26 was the one that
it was 26 that they were
Yeah.
different versions. Got it. Okay, very well. So we'll get back. She'll get back to us shortly. So the budget amendment is a typical amendment that we make at this time of year. So what we typically do with the town's budget is approve the preliminary budget in July or in early June for July. And then before the tax rate is set in December, we always take one last crack at the budget and ask town meeting to reallocate monies or address any changes in the budget since the spring. And normally those tend to be in two areas: state aid or health insurance. Those are always things that aren't resolved and they're big ticket items typically. This year, interestingly, I don't believe we have any changes in those two, or very modest changes. But what we are proposing is to generate an additional $2 million in revenue. That is the result of looking at our revenues again. As you remember, last year, we took a pretty conservative view of our revenues based on the COVID impacts, and they were significant at the time, but they have improved. And there are a number of areas in our local receipts where we suggest that additional revenue be available to support the budget. And what typically is done, and of course we're meeting with the town school partnership in a week or so, is that those revenues are general revenues and they would be distributed based upon effectively the 60-40 formula, 60% available to the school department and the remaining 40% to town departments. The school department, as you know, has a bottom line budget authority, so we can allocate that money to their bottom line budget, but can't compel any particular use of that. That's different on the town side. We break the budget down to many different departments and accounts, and so we have to be explicit about where that money would go. It is my recommendation, my strong recommendation, that all of this money that's been allocated to the town side of the budget be put in the collective bargaining reserve. Consistent with our more conservative approach with revenue projections last spring, we took a very conservative approach on our collective bargaining and frankly didn't put anything in the collective bargaining reserve for fiscal 22. We would like to have the ability now with revenues improving to allocate the money in that area so that we could have a better opportunity to bargain with our unions and provide the adequate compensation increases, which most of them have to be collectively bargained to our employees. There are some other changes that are being proposed under this article. One is we always appropriate the ride share revenue, so we get a percentage of Uber and Lyft rides, and in the fall is when we're available to allocate that, and we're proposing to do that. That's $81,753 that we would allocate for various capital projects. And then we want to allocate the remaining $200,000 to the racial equity fund. You remember we've done 300, we've committed to doing 500, and now we have the timing is available for that revenue to support that. The only thing that Melissa wanted me to mention is that it's likely that the advisory committee may seek an amendment and add in the expenses that are the subject of Article 30, the Spiegel Amendment. But I don't have any official report on that at this time.
Well, we can always move for reconsideration when we learn more. Any questions about what Mel just summarized? Should we move favorable action? Okay, thank you very much, Mel, for working on that. I fully concur that that's the appropriate places to be allocating the additional funding. All those in favor, Bernard,
Aye.
Raul,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
and the chair votes favorable action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Melissa just texted and indicated that the petitioner, she mentioned Linda, so I assume that's Linda
Pelkey,
Yes.
who we have.
Oh,
So why don't we
she's here.
promote her
Yes.
and hear straight from the source? Thank you so much for hopping onto our meeting, Linda.
Yeah, I'm in 2 meetings at once. It's really interesting. And this is my iPad and I'm not used to using it, so sorry.
No worries, your lighting is great.
Oh, good. All right. So would you like to hear what got changed in Article 26 between when you heard it and now?
Please, and if you can try
Okay.
to keep it concise,
Oh, yeah.
which you
it's
usually
very
do.
brief. Yeah, it's very brief. I've got some bullet points right here. Okay. So what we did, the petitioners, we decoupled the resolution from the detailed proposal. We had just done the proposal as an example, but people were kind of hung up on all the details about that. So we just said, okay, it's really not that. So, and we also withdrew our request for ARPA funding for the proposal because that was a source of a consternation for many. So, and rather than asking the select board to start the process, we are asking town meeting to ask you to appoint a planning committee to plan the plan. So it's a small step forward, and it would be a democratically run committee with the assistance of the director of planning to discuss and come up with a proposal for how we might move forward doing comprehensive planning and zoning reform. And Kara has done an estimate on the possible cost of that, and she can speak to that. The goal of this committee would be to recommend a scope, budget, process, and work program going forward for planning. And the resolution also contains suggestions about the scope, process, and considerations that we feel are important efforts and elements in a meaningful planning process, but they are just suggestions, and this is a resolution. It also talks about what's a meaningful community inclusive process, which we think is very key to this bringing people together and really coming up with a shared vision for the town. That's the ultimate goal. And the moderator has ruled that the amendment is within scope. We did make some further amendments in consultation with Jonathan Klein. And so we had a unanimous vote last night at EDAB in support. The planning board voted unanimously in support, and the advisory committee had one abstention, who was one of my co-petitioners, in unanimous support.
Excellent. Let's hear from Kara, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves.
Sure. So thank you, Kara Bruton, Director of Planning and Community Development. Advisory, as you probably know, is going through a process where they are attaching a form that says, you know, what would the cost or financial gain be for every warrant article, and in addition to their normal policy review that they've been doing. So for this resolution, the petitioners have been working with multiple boards and committees, and I am happy that They have incorporated a lot of what they heard at land use committees, like the housing board, like EDAB, and like the planning board, especially because these are some, not all, but these are some of the end users. If we were to take on, a comprehensive plan reboot, we want to make sure that it's useful to those end users that you appoint. So that's all very in a good place, I believe. As far as the cost impact, this is just getting a group going to talk about, what's the gaps analysis, what could we do in the future to make it more useful, that kind of thing. I'm estimating that that's, a quarter to a third of a staff person for 6 months, depending on how long the committee discussions go about that. But we do not have that resource in-house. And in your packets, I know you have a copy of that email that I sent to advisory listing, 8 or 9 other things that we do want to get to as those staff constraints are, hopefully change. So I'm saying this is the marginal cost of this resolution, if it passes, if the select board wants to move forward with this, has a political bandwidth to do it. The marginal cost would be hiring an additional staff person at a T6 level, but that person wouldn't be spending all of their time on this kind of very preliminary work, making sure everybody's aligned, trying to figure out where the funding resources could come from, that kind of thing.
Any comments by select board members? Miriam.
I seem to be making a lot of comments tonight. Oh, maybe that's not different from every select board meeting. So I guess my struggle is that I still feel like there's redundancy here. So I would just like to hear how this is not somehow superseding the already ongoing planning processes, that why we would have to take this on, to me, it seems like this is already stuff that's happening. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how this has added value, especially because it has added cost and time and effort. So that's really where my tension is.
Sure. So I guess that's a question for me.
And for Kara too.
Okay. Well, first off, the efforts that are going on now are topic areas. They're specific to one topic, and they're not looking at how one type of land use and doing something with that is going to affect all the other land uses, all of the services and facilities that the town depends on providing our citizens. So this is a way to try to assess the impacts of different land use scenarios and what is possible in town, what is politically acceptable, what is physically desirable, and how we can estimate synergies to help as many goals being moved forward as possible. It is a comprehensive plan. We haven't done comprehensive planning in Brookline for 17 years. And the one we have now is very old, and it does not contemplate many of the goals that people now have in terms of equity, dealing with climate, dealing with housing affordability. All the issues that are top of mind cannot be addressed in a single topic area plan. You have to look at things holistically. If we're talking about equity, for instance, what can we do about environmental justice in the areas that need that? And what can we do to promote better access to facilities and services for people who don't have that access now? All sorts of things about infrastructure, projections of demographics, big picture things. We have many topic area plans, but we don't have a vision for the town. And also it's about involving the community in a much deeper way than we do right now in planning, in these kind of issues about their community. And so it's kind of twofold, I think. It's about being comprehensive in how we analyze our potential growth and also involving the community in a much deeper way, in an inclusive way. So it's very different. It's not the same. Looking at a little parcel or looking at a couple of areas in town that might grow, or one land use that you care about, you're never going to get a complete picture of what the impacts of that growth might be to town services, or to facilities or our infrastructure. And also in terms of public realm improvements, meaning like parks and sidewalks and our complete streets goals, those have to be thought up ahead of time. As development comes in, they contribute to that. And if you don't have a plan for that to begin with, you're not going to successfully achieve a change over time. Like, for instance, if you wanted the sidewalk to be wider on a particular street, you would then change the depth of the setback so that land would be available over time to eventually widen that sidewalk. But if you don't know ahead of time, you're not going to be able to do that. So it's just two very different scales of planning, I would say. And I would also remind the board that when we took up warrant article 34 in the fall of 2020, that was the housing resolution. Everyone voted, the select board, the advisory, and town meeting all voted that they wanted to understand the impacts of those types of changes before we as a town made that a policy choice. And that's one thing that would be addressed in this that is not going to be addressed in any other way. So I hope that answers your question, Miriam. You still look puzzled. So
yeah,
she's got a follow-up question.
I've got a follow-up question. So,
yeah.
so please explain to me how that's different from the housing production plan that is currently undergoing.
Yeah. Okay. So the housing production plan is not going to necessarily talk about the impacts to all of our town facilities or look at, are we locating housing in a way that supports a holistic community that has access to the facilities that they need. The housing production plan is very much focused on finding areas in town where we might accommodate more housing, but it's not answering the question of, if we did that, how could we do it in a way that it also addresses equity and climate and all the other goals that we have. And it's also not looking at what is the opportunity cost of making all those changes while not thinking about the other changes we want to make, commercial development, schools, everything else that has to be thought about in a complete neighborhood and community. So it's really, it's a first step. It's identifying the need, which is that data work is really important. And it's also looking at potential sites, but to decide which sites really make sense for the town, it's going to be, I think, a more holistic vision that's going to answer that question. So more looking at where does it really make sense, not just where is it possible, or where might we make some changes. And also the person is not really a zoning expert who is doing this work.
All right, thank you. I'd love to, I don't want to supersede Heather. Heather, you call, and who's next? I'd love to hear from Kara.
Well, let's hear from Raul and John, and then I'll give Kara an opportunity to speak to this.
Thanks. I mean, I'll just say for now, I remain skeptical of this. I'm not the idea to have a committee to plan a process. I mean, it sounds like a lot of bureaucracy to me, and I'm wondering why we can't just, if this is something that we want the planning department to do, why we can't just go ahead and say it, and have them develop the process that's going to work well for the town. I am very curious to hear from somebody from EDAB. I see Jonathan Klein saying that he's willing to share some thoughts, but I heard EDAB name checked as being on board, and I'm curious to hear why at this point.
Well, let's give him an opportunity to raise his hand. If
I may have
he
said
wants to
Jonathan
speak.
Davis. I meant Jonathan Klein, by the way.
No, you said
I did?
Jonathan Klein.
Okay.
So if he wants to be promoted, Devin, please promote him. But first we'll take John and then Bernard. We'll hear from Kara, and then I will call on Jonathan.
Yeah,
John.
Yes, thank you very much. I have actually been in favor of Article 26 from the outset. And I think Linda did a very good job of making the case for it. It's kind of, in my mind, it's kind of hard to be against comprehensive planning. I could think of a couple of reasons maybe to be against comprehensive planning if we just did one, which is not true. I mean, the one we did was from 2004, and it covered 2005 to 2015. So, it's been quite a while. If the one that we did before had not gotten any results, maybe that would be a reason not to do a comprehensive plan. The one we did before had built into it follow through twice over the course of years, that succeeded the actual introduction of the plan. And if anybody wants to just see for themselves, search on the town website for the checklist, the spreadsheet of everything that was proposed that be done in the current comprehensive plan, and everything that was done. It had real impacts. It had real effects. And comprehensive plans can make a difference. And if we believe in goals, which I think we all believe in goals, a comprehensive plan is how you get to your goal. And I like Article 26 even more now that it has been put into the form that it's currently in for this reason. There were people who, for good reasons, and they expressed them well, had some reservations about what we were embarking on and wanted to have it better defined before we then set it in motion. And so in a very constructive way, all parties got together and said, if we have to take a little bit longer to make sure that when we launch this, we launch it in a way that gets widespread acclaim and cooperation and participation, then let's take a little bit more time with it. I can't fault the petitioners for going along with that, and I credit the critics for raising some good questions and for getting us to where we are now with this proposal to take a little time, talk about how we're going to do it, but then launch a comprehensive planning effort once that's done.
Bernard?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the observation that last week, David Lee noted that housing cannot be seen or developed in a vacuum, that it has to be developed in the context of an overall or comprehensive plan. I think that's particularly important in Brookline, because for a housing plan or any other particular plan to really be sustainable, it has to take into account not just things like equity and climate issues, but also things like racial equity, not just equity, but racial equity and racial integration and balance, as well as infrastructure and a zillion other things. And if you don't, do that stuff, from the standpoint of a comprehensive plan, you could create a problem down the road that could be devastating to the town or harm the town. The other thing is that the timing, the original warrant article had a timing issue that I think would have been problematic. And that is, as our town administrator has announced, in a year, we're going to be working with a new town administrator. So, the current way that the warrant article is structured, I think is more, it provides us an easier way to transition to a new town administrator and carry out the full, comprehensive plan elements. So.
Great, thank you. So I want to give an opportunity to Kara to weigh in, and then I will acknowledge Jonathan to talk about why EDAB came down on the decision that it did.
Thank you, Heather. So I'm actually going to jump around a little bit with some of the questions. Jonathan has done a lot of work on this warrant article, but he is actually not on EDAB, although certainly friendly with many of the EDAB members. In your packets, I think only today, you got a formal memo from the EDAB co-chairs talking about their unanimous support of this revised warrant article. And specifically, I'll read that they point out that this revised article now calls on the select board to appoint a committee, including a call to, quote, examine the 2005 comp plan with a view towards determining how a future comprehensive plan could be more effective. This change was cited as important since a previous comprehensive plan has not advanced economic development in town. So as other people have said here tonight, in the last 13 years, economic development has been making strides in changing the zoning, convincing town meeting to change the zoning to allow any significant commercial development at all. And that's been done on a site-by-site basis because the calculation was that's what was politically feasible. And the sites that we were looking at were large enough that, it kind of made sense to dive in and have that granularity. We are now hearing from many people in the community, including EDAB, that we need to be looking at larger swaths of areas, not just site by site, corridor studies like John Van Scoyek's leading. But then also to Linda's point earlier, if we are only doing corridor studies, I can imagine that given all the priorities, we might never get to, 2 and 3 family districts, understanding what the organic development pressures are and whether and how and why development is happening that may not be creating more housing units, maybe creating more expensive units instead of less expensive units that are there today, and not seen as favorable to the immediate neighborhood. So there's kind of all of these issues, as Linda said, that do cross over, but that we might not get to area by area, never mind topic by topic. And I also want to mention that this is an effort like this would not just include planning staff. When we look at how comprehensive plans are, regulated by state law, what they strongly recommend be in those, it includes, as Linda said, a lot of infrastructure, but also parks and open space. So in addition to a planning effort, this would also be an effort that we would want to make sure DPW had the time to carve out, as well as their relevant boards and commissions to support. And I am in conversation with Commissioner Galantine about this warrant article as it progresses. I haven't seen any red flags yet from DPW. I did Roll's question about this sounds like a lot of bureaucracy. Can the select board just say to do it? I say yes. If the select board would like to make a proclamation that all of the land use boards and DPW and planning staff should come back and report what efforts are needed, that would be sufficient for me, and I'm sure sufficient for Commissioner Galantine, and would signal to your boards and commissions that support you in policy decisions that that's something you would be interested in exploring. But again, I cannot take that on unless we also added at least one additional staff person. I'm sure I missed some questions, but I'll stop there.
Excellent. I did say that I would give Jonathan Klein an opportunity to weigh in. I guess we all assumed that you were on EDAP, Jonathan, so you got a temporary promotion.
Thank you. Jonathan Klein, a town meeting member from Precinct 10. I'm a member of the Housing Advisory Board, but not a member of EDAP. And I will take, I won't say anything further about that. I have a lot of respect for the work they do. It's above my level most of the time. So I will say that people know that I was an early and ardent critic of warrant article 26 in its original form. I sponsored a referral motion at the HAB that in effect tried to do what I think Kara might have just described, which is to refer this to a board, including, to a subcommittee of the planning committee that would have included the land use boards and been staffed by the planning director. I think in response to that, the petitioners introduced I would say a pretty dramatically revised version of warrant article 26, and then they made a few additional changes in response to comments I have. And so I have come to be I will call it a reluctant supporter of the current warrant article 26. I think that the idea of a thoughtful planning process before we go into comprehensive planning is a good idea. It uses a lot less resources. And I respect and appreciate, as we did with Articles 23 and 24, the significant effort to compromise and come to agreement on this. So those are my thoughts. I will point out that since I have the floor, that both EDAB and I believe the Planning Board, which both approved it unanimously in its current form, both also in their comments do expressed reservations about it that they wanted you to be aware of. I think Kara may have spoken to the EDAB's letter, but I think I am fairly summarizing their reservations that this not interfere with other efforts going on including both the other planning efforts like the corridor studies and the housing production plan, and also and this is my reservation as well, the appropriate implementation of the results of those efforts when they come to fruition. So I believe that we are going to need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to do comprehensive planning. I agree with Linda on that it's very important, and it's something we haven't done, we should pursue, but we also cannot let it slow down the work that we need to be doing on critical issues that involve climate, housing, racial equity, things that are going to come before us in the next several years while we're in the process of this planning. So thank you for the opportunity again to speak. I hope I haven't overstepped my role, and thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Raul, and then I have some thoughts of my own.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just say thank you, Kara, for those thoughts, and Jonathan for yours. I think that last piece that Jonathan mentioned is critical, is that we have to move forward here. Comprehensive planning is great. I do not subscribe to the sort of rosy retelling of the last process. The last comprehensive planning process. We as a community are not where we need to be in terms of economic development by a long shot. And we can have studies and we can have plans, but ultimately we need to put those plans into operation. And also town meeting needs to vote for them. And we can't forget about that part. So, in my mind, every opportunity we have to move economic development forward in Brookline, we need to do, and we need to do it yesterday. Certainly not after a multi-year planning for a plan process. So HPP and the corridor studies and all this stuff, it's just got, if a comprehensive planning process is happening alongside of that and not interfering in any way, shape, or form with what's already underway. And by the way, folks may also continue through the town meeting process to bring zoning amendments and other changes to Brookline. Those also have to be welcomed in the meantime. I'm happy to either support or maybe tacitly support this longer planning effort, but not if it in any way, shape, or form gets in the way of other things that need to be doing that are already underway, and also new initiatives that may come to town meeting. They need to have a fair shake right now, not wait until some future date when a plan might actually happen. This cannot be an excuse for delay.
So my thoughts, I'm very pleased that a compromise was reached, because I really didn't know how I was going to come out on this. I certainly understand the thoughts behind it, and I philosophically agree with Linda about comprehensive planning. My biggest reservation was that it would impede on current processes that were underway. So I like that this doesn't seem to be in direct conflict with those processes. The biggest challenge for us is this extra staff person. I fully believe that we need to hire an additional planner. Nearly a third to a half of our warrant articles in recent years have been about planning. And we're experiencing growth. We saw that in the census numbers that were released. The other thing that I want to point out is, so I've been on the board for almost 5 years, and the only discussions that I've had about big picture planning in the town was when we zoned for the new marijuana retail licenses. We actually had to look at the entire town and select where in town we were going to locate those things. And then now that I'm chairing the redistricting committee, I'm looking at a full-size map and trying to look at a holistic picture. We don't actually do that very often in town. And I see an upside to having someone, I don't know if it should just, be our planning department or if it should be this committee looking at that. I don't see a downside. as long as it doesn't conflict with the housing production plan and a few of the other studies that we have going on. So I will be voting favorable action on this. I think it will illuminate some of the pushes and pulls of some of the public services. I have been very public in my support for additional housing. I am a big proponent of density, but I'm not scared to find out how many additional students we would then have to accommodate in all of our K through 8s. We need to know what is coming to be able to make decisions. So those are my thoughts. Any other comments before I will probably move favorable action on the current warrant article 26? Seeing none, I will poll the board. Remember, favorable action is what I'm putting forward. All those in favor, Bernard.
Aye.
Raul.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Miriam.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I believe that's our business tonight.
Wow, 7:50. Good job.
Might be a new record.
Pinch me.
My yoga retreat starts now.
Until next time.
Night.
Good night. Good
All
night,
right.
everybody.